everybody, and welcome to my channel. On today's video we are going to meet a plant. Spring is here, which means longer days, warmer days, and an awakening of nature. So we're about to see a whole lot of color. One of the most iconic images of springtime is the blossoms of a cherry tree. So in today's video, we're going to learn a little bit more about cherry tree. We're also going to learn how to identify cherry tree. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll feel confident enough to go out on your nature walk and you'll be able to identify cherry tree all on your own. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. Cherry tree can be a little bit complicated. There are a lot of different varieties of cherry trees, but they do have some certain characteristics in common. So no matter what kind of cherry tree it is, you can feel confident in identifying, at least you know it's a cherry tree. So let's try to classify cherry tree into some categories, and we're going to do that based on origin. So to start off with, we have our native cherry trees. So saying that they're native means that they're naturally occurring in the area. The black cherry is what we have here on the eastern United States, and its natural range is from Canada all the way to Florida. And the cherry tree is supposed to be here. This one's supposed to be here. It's beneficial to the plants and its ecosystem and the wildlife that lives in it. And so having a native plant means it's good. Next, we have a non-native exotic cherry tree. So these are cherry trees that were brought over from another place. That means they don't naturally occur here, but they're not doing any harm by being here. A good example of those kind of cherry trees would be the kind that are in Washington, D.C. at the tidal basin. Those were gifted to us from Japan, and they have established themselves around the tidal basin, but they're not doing any harm. They're perfectly okay growing and thriving right there, and they're not causing any harm to the environment around them. Now, what happens if a plant suddenly does start causing harm? Well, if a plant starts being harmful to its environment, it's then classified as an invasive species. So in order to be an invasive species, it needs to be causing harm. And it can cause harm in a variety of ways. It can cause harm by outcompeting the plants around it so that it takes over an area. It can cause harm by producing food for wildlife that's really not beneficial, either makes them sick or it doesn't give them the nutrition they need. Or it can cause harm to structures. So if plants start breaking through walls or causing rot to bridges, that can cause a problem. That's harmful. So there's a lot of different ways an invasive plant can be harmful. Luckily for us, our cherry trees that are introduced, our non-native exotic species, they are not considered invasive. So we're good on that front. And then last, we have what's called cultivars. Now, these are plants that were selected and bred together to enhance certain characteristics. So a good example would be this tree right behind me. This is a cherry tree. It's called a plum cherry. And it's a little bit different than your native cherry in that it was selected to have purple leaves. So although the characteristics of the leaves are going to be the same whether they're green or purple, it has a different color. And so you're going to have some cherry trees that are like that. Maybe they were selected for their flowers, maybe they were selected for their fruits, or maybe they were selected for their leaves. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the characteristics of a cherry tree. So to start off with, we're going to look at the cherry tree as a whole, and we're going to see how tall it is. Typically, cherry trees are anywhere between 25 to 100 feet tall, although in my experience, they have kind of been between 60 and 80. And where they fall in the canopy levels tend to be mid to lower understory. And so that means that they're not going to be the tallest tree in the forest. They're not going to be as tall as pines or oaks or beeches. Depending on the space that they have around them and the nutrients available to them, they may be smaller or larger, just depending on where they're growing. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at the flowers. So here we have the cherry blossoms. These are the flowers of the cherry tree. They are a delicate flower with 5 petals. They tend to be a light pink. And these blossoms will last about 2 weeks. And they tend to blossom in late March, early April. After the blossoms fall off, the leaves are going to come in. And the leaves are going to be ovate shaped with serrated edges, toothed. Now this one has been selected to have those purple, red leaves, but it's still going to have the same characteristics of the shape and edges. One of the great things about the cherry tree is that it is very fragrant. It has a nice aroma to it. And so in addition to enjoying the beautiful flowers, you can also enjoy the lovely smell. We can't talk about cherry trees without talking about its fruit, the cherry. So depending on the type of cherry tree, will determine how tasty that fruit is. So some cherry trees will produce a very tasty fruit. And some cherry trees will produce, let's just say, a less tasty fruit. For example, this cherry tree is a cultivar that was selected more for its red leaves rather than its fruit. And so its fruit, although edible, is very tart. The fruits of a cherry tree tend to be ripe around June, so I'd keep my eyes out for it. One of the most distinguishing things about the cherry tree is its bark. It has smooth bark with these striations in it, and these striations are known as lenticels. And the bark itself, the smooth parts, to me they're so smooth that they almost look a little bit shiny, so that helps me identify the bark when I see it in the forest. Now these lenticels are really important because they help exchange gases to the tree. And so just like we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide, they're using those lenticels to breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. And all trees have these lenticels. They're just might be bigger, smaller, covered up. But the cherry tree has theirs very prominently displayed, so it makes it very easy to identify. But we're going to take a look at an older tree because as the tree ages, the bark is going to change just a little bit. So here I have an older cherry tree, and I can tell that it's a little bit older because of the way that the bark is changing. It's no longer very smooth and distinguished. It's kind of cracked and rigid. I can also see that there's animal damage and there's some lichen growing on it. So this tree has been around for a little bit. But if I look carefully, and especially if I start looking up the tree, I can still see those lenticels that are there. This one's a little better. Right there, it's lenticels. So it may be harder to see on the old growth, but if you look up towards the newer growth, you'll still be able to see that characteristic cherry bark. And cherries can live a long time. Cultivars tend to live around 30 years, but the black cherry, which is native to the eastern United States, can live about 250 years. So that's a long time. So definitely take a moment to check out the tree in its entirety, especially if one section of the bark looks a little bit different than the rest of the tree. So there you have it, some ways to identify cherry tree by its flowers, by its leaves, and by its bark. Thank you for joining me on today's video. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about cherry tree. I hope you feel confident enough that when you're out in the forest, you can identify cherry tree. And I hope you enjoy its beautiful blooms while they last in the springtime. If you like what you saw, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. This is Ranger Amanda signing off. Seek adventure, discover beauty.